The velvet pouch hit the linoleum with a sound like a small animal dying. Ray Dawson didn't notice at first. His hands were full of dishes, the lunch rush had left the kitchen wrecked, and his prosthetic was pinching in that specific way that meant he'd been on his feet 2 hours too long. The pouch must have slipped from his jacket pocket when he'd hung it on the hook by the service door. It was Mabel who saw it fall. Mabel, who owned the Crossroads Diner and had hired Ray 6 months ago without asking questions she didn't need answers to. She opened her mouth to say something, but the woman at the counter was faster. The biker rose from her stool in one fluid motion, crossed the 3 steps to where the pouch had landed, and knelt. She was maybe 50, hair streaked gray and pulled back tight, wearing a leather cut with Road Saints MC on the back and a patch on the front that read, Stitch. She picked up the pouch, felt its weight, and looked toward the kitchen window where Ray was scrubbing a pot like it owed him money. She didn't say a word. She walked to the service door, hung the pouch on the hook next to Ray's jacket, and returned to her stool. Picked up her coffee, went back to watching the rain streak down the front windows like the last 30 seconds hadn't happened. Mabel watched the whole thing. The biker caught her eye, gave a small shake of her head. Not now, not like this. Ray Dawson was 34 years old and felt 60. 2 tours in Afghanistan, a Silver Star he'd never asked for, a Purple Heart he'd earned the hard way when the IED took his left leg below the knee and 3 of his friends entirely. He'd come home to a wife who'd tried to understand and a daughter who'd been 11 years old and scared of the stranger wearing her father's face. The marriage lasted 14 months. The drinking lasted longer. He'd been sober for 2 years now, sober and alone, washing dishes in a diner in the Missouri Ozarks, sending child support checks to an ex-wife who cashed them without comment, and a daughter who'd stopped answering his calls. The lunch rush ended. Ray wiped down the counters, refilled the sugar dispensers, did all the small tasks that kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. When he finally went to grab his jacket, he found the velvet pouch hanging on the hook where he'd never put it. He stood there for a long moment, staring at it. Then he looked through the service window at the woman, still sitting at the counter, her coffee cup empty now, her eyes on him. She didn't say a word, just held his gaze until he looked away. Ray took the jacket and the pouch and walked out the back door into the September rain. His truck was parked behind the dumpsters, a '94 Ford, with more rust than paint. He sat in the cab without starting the engine, listening to the rain on the roof, holding the pouch in his hands. The metals were still inside. He didn't need to check. He knew their weight the way he knew the weight of everything he carried. The Silver Star for the ambush, where he'd pulled 2 men to safety, while his leg bled out beneath him. The Purple Heart, for the privilege of surviving when others hadn't. He should have thrown them away years ago. Would have, if his daughter hadn't found them in the trash when she was 12, hadn't looked at him with those serious eyes and asked why he was throwing away the things that proved he was brave. "I'm not brave," he'd told her. "I'm just the one who didn't die." She hadn't understood. How could she? She was 12, and her father was a hero, and heroes didn't wash dishes in diners or wake up screaming or forget to call on birthdays because the phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The rain was letting up. Ray tucked the pouch into his jacket pocket, started the truck, and pulled out of the lot. In his rearview mirror, he saw the biker emerge from the diner's front door, helmet in hand, watching him go. She still didn't say a word. Carla Stitch Reyes had been a combat medic in a previous life, back when she'd believed that saving people was something you could do with your hands. She'd learned better. Some wounds didn't bleed where you could see them. She watched the dishwasher's truck disappear around the curve on Route 7, then pulled out her phone and made a call. "I found one," she said when the line picked up. "Silver Star, Purple Heart, leg gone below the knee, working at a diner outside Cedar Falls. Looks like he's about 2 bad days from disappearing." The voice on the other end asked a question. "No," Stitch said. "He doesn't know I'm watching, not yet, but I've seen that look before. My brother had it the week before he put his service pistol in his mouth." She ended the call and stood in the diner parking lot, rain dripping from the eaves, watching the empty road where the truck had been. The dog tags under her shirt, Danny's tags, her brother's tags, pressed cold against her chest. Some men you could save with your hands. Others you had to save a different way. She mounted her bike, kicked the engine to life, and rode east toward town. She had calls to make, people to contact, a network to activate. The dishwasher didn't know it yet, but he'd just become Road Saints business, and the Road Saints took care of their own, even the ones who didn't know they belonged yet. The eviction notice was taped to Ray's door when he got home. Pink paper, official letterhead, 30 days to vacate or pay the 3 months he owed. He read it twice, folded it into a square, and put it in his pocket next to the velvet pouch. The apartment wasn't much, a 1-bedroom above a hardware store on Cedar Falls' main drag, with a radiator that clanked all night and a bathroom window that didn't close all the way. But it was his, the first place he'd lived alone since the divorce, the first place that didn't smell like the VA hospital or his mother's disappointment or the bottom of a bottle. He sat on the edge of his bed and took out his phone. 3 missed calls from a number he recognized but hadn't answered in months. His ex-wife, Karen. She never called unless something was wrong. He almost put the phone down, almost let it go to voicemail, the way he'd let everything go for the past 2 years. But something about the day, the metals, the biker's silence, the rain, made him press the call back button. Karen answered on the second ring. Ray. Her voice was careful, the way it had been at the end of their marriage, when every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. I didn't think you'd call back. What's wrong? It's Sophie. A pause. She wants to see you. Ray closed his eyes. Sophie. 14 now, almost 15. He'd missed her last birthday. Sent a card 3 days late with a check inside. The coward's apology. She's been asking about you, Karen continued. I told her you weren't in a good place, that you needed time. But she found some things, old pictures, your uniform. She's doing a project at school about family members who served, and Karen's voice caught. She wants to interview you for Veterans Day. The words hit Ray like shrapnel. Veterans Day. The day everyone suddenly remembered that soldiers existed, put on their flag pins and their thank you for your service smiles, then went back to forgetting until next November. I can't, he said. Ray, I said I can't. He stood up, paced to the window, looked down at the empty street. She doesn't need to see me like this. Working in a diner, living in this. He stopped. Karen didn't need to know about the eviction. She deserves better. She deserves her father. Karen's voice had hardened. I've made a lot of excuses for you, Ray. Told her you were sick, that you were getting help, that you'd come back when you were ready. But she's not a little girl anymore. She can see through the lies. Then stop lying. I'm not the one who's lying. The words hung there, sharp and true. She has a game next Friday, volleyball. She made varsity as a freshman. She asked me to invite you. Ray's hand tightened on the phone. A game. A gym full of parents and kids and normal families doing normal things. The prosthetic would be obvious. People would stare. Sophie's friends would ask questions. I'll think about it, he said, and ended the call before Karen could respond. He sat in the dark for a long time, holding the velvet pouch, feeling the weight of the metals through the fabric. Then he got up, opened the drawer where he kept his AA chip and his discharge papers, and pulled out the photograph he'd hidden beneath them. Sophie at 11, the summer before the IED. She was sitting on his shoulders, both of them laughing at something Karen had said, the sun catching the gold in her hair. He'd carried this photo through 2 deployments. It was the first thing he'd asked for when he woke up in the field hospital, before he'd even asked about his leg. The paper was soft with handling, the edges worn thin. Ray traced the outline of his daughter's face with one finger, then put the photo in his wallet where he could feel it against his chest. 1 week. Sophie's game was in 1 week. He had to find a way to keep this apartment. Had to find a way to show up looking like a father instead of a wreck. He had to find a way to be the man in that photograph again, even if that man didn't exist anymore. Warren Kessler sat in his office at Ozark Property Management, staring at the stack of files on his desk. 12 units behind on rent, 8 pending evictions, 3 more complaints from the corporate office in St. Louis about underperforming assets. The file on top was Ray Dawson's. Warren had been putting it off for weeks, finding excuses, losing the paperwork, hoping the kid would catch up. But corporate had sent someone down last week, a woman in a gray suit who'd smiled like a shark and talked about maximizing occupancy and removing problem tenants. Warren was 63 years old. He'd managed these buildings for 22 years, back when they'd been owned by the Hendricks family, back when being a landlord meant knowing your tenants' names and fixing their radiators on weekends. The Hendricks had sold out last spring, and now Warren answered to a holding company in St. Louis that saw tenants as line items on a spreadsheet. He opened Ray's file, 3 months behind. No prior issues, no complaints from neighbors, no damage to the unit. The kid worked at Mabel's diner, paid what he could when he could, always apologized when he fell short. Warren had seen the prosthetic, had done the math. Afghanistan, probably. Maybe Iraq. Either way, the kid had given more for this country than most people ever would. And now, Warren was supposed to throw him out for the sake of corporate's quarterly report. He pulled out his phone and dialed the diner. Crossroads, Mabel speaking. Mabel, it's Warren Kessler. I need to talk to you about Ray. Stitch found out about the eviction from Mabel that same evening. She'd gone back to the diner for dinner, hoping to get another look at the dishwasher, and instead got an earful from a 68-year-old woman who had opinions about property management companies and wasn't afraid to share them. 30 days, Mabel said, refilling Stitch's coffee without being asked. That boy hasn't missed a shift in 6 months, works doubles when I need him, never complains, never causes trouble, and they're throwing him out because some suit in St. Louis wants to raise the rent. Stitch stirred her coffee slowly. What's he owe? 3 months, maybe $1,800 total. I'd loan it to him myself, but... Mabel shrugged. He won't take it. I tried. Practically had to force him to accept an extra sandwich at the end of his shift. Pride. Worse than pride. Shame. Mabel leaned against the counter, her voice dropping. He thinks he doesn't deserve help. Thinks if he takes anything from anybody, it means he's failed. I've seen that look before, on my husband's face after the plant closed. Took him 5 years to let me buy groceries without feeling like less of a man. Stitch thought about her brother. Danny had been the same way, refusing to talk to the VA counselors, refusing to lean on family, convinced that asking for help meant admitting weakness. She'd found him in his apartment on a Tuesday morning, the gun still in his hand, his dog tags on the kitchen table, like he'd wanted someone to know he'd served. She'd worn those tags every day since, a reminder of what happened when you let pride win. The eviction, Stitch said. Can it be stopped? If he pays what he owes, but $1,800 might as well be $18,000 to a dishwasher making $10 an hour. I'll handle it. Mabel raised an eyebrow. You don't even know him. I know enough. Stitch pulled out a 20, left it on the counter. Don't tell him where it came from. He'll refuse it. Just make the problem go away. I'll get you the money by tomorrow. And then what? Stitch didn't answer. She was already thinking about the call she'd made that afternoon, the network she'd activated. The Road Saints had a fund for exactly this kind of situation, veterans in trouble, bills that needed paying, gaps that needed filling. But money was the easy part. The hard part was getting Ray Dawson to accept that he was worth saving. She walked out into the September evening, the air cooling as the sun dropped behind the hills. Her phone buzzed, a text from the chapter president confirming that 6 riders could be in Cedar Falls by the weekend. Another text from her contact at the VA promising to look into Ray's benefits file and see if anything had fallen through the cracks. The pieces were coming together. Now, she just had to figure out how to put them in front of a man who didn't want to be helped. She pulled Danny's tags from under her shirt and held them in her palm. The metal was warm from her skin, the engraving worn smooth from years of handling. I couldn't save you, she said quietly, but maybe I can save him. The tags didn't answer. They never did. But Stitch had learned to hear her brother's voice in the silence, not the voice from the end when everything had gone dark, but the voice from before when he'd believed that helping people was the only thing that mattered. She tucked the tags away and mounted her bike. Friday was 5 days out. Sophie's volleyball game, though Stitch didn't know about that yet. 5 days to convince a man that he deserved to live. She'd done more with less. The money appeared in Warren Kessler's account on Wednesday morning. $1,800, wire transfer, memo line reading, Dawson rent arrears. Warren stared at the screen for a long time, then picked up the phone and called the number Stitch had left with Mabel. It's done, he said, but I can't lie to the kid. If he asks, he won't ask, Stitch said. Not yet. Just tear up the notice and give him some room to breathe. Warren wasn't so sure. He'd seen Ray's face when the notice went up, the way his jaw had tightened, the way he'd folded the paper with military precision and tucked it away without a word. That wasn't a man who let things slide. That was a man keeping count, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But he tore up the eviction notice anyway, and he didn't say a word when Ray came in Thursday afternoon to drop off a partial payment, $200 in crumpled 20s, everything he had. "This is for September," Ray said. "I'll have October by the 15th. I know I'm behind, but you're square." Warren pushed the money back across the desk. "Somebody covered it." Ray went still. "What do you mean, somebody covered it?" "Anonymous donation. Came through yesterday. You're paid up through December." The silence stretched. Warren watched something move behind Ray's eyes. Confusion first, then suspicion, then something darker. Something that looked like shame curdling into anger. "Who?" Ray's voice was flat. "Who paid it?" "I told you, anonymous." "Nobody does anything anonymous." Ray's hands had curled into fists at his sides. "Who's been talking about me? Mabel? Did she?" "Ray." Warren stood up, moved around the desk. He'd managed enough struggling tenants to recognize when someone was about to bolt. Whoever it was, they did it because they wanted to help. That's not something to be angry about. "I don't need help." The words came out sharp, brittle. "I'm not a charity case. I'm not some—" He stopped, pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. "I was handling it. I had a plan. And now you have a better plan. 4 months to get back on your feet, no pressure, no deadlines." Warren put a hand on Ray's shoulder, felt him flinch. "Take the gift, son. Whoever gave it, they didn't do it because they think you're weak. They did it because they think you're worth keeping around." Ray shook off his hand and walked out without another word. He didn't go to the diner that afternoon, didn't answer Mabel's calls, sat in his apartment with the curtains drawn, staring at the velvet pouch on the table in front of him, trying to understand why kindness felt like a knife between his ribs. He'd built a life on asking nothing from anyone, on being small enough to slip through the cracks, invisible enough that no one had to worry about him. That was the deal he'd made with himself after the divorce, after the drinking, after the night he'd scared Sophie so badly she wouldn't come out of her room for 3 hours. He would take care of himself. He would need nothing, and in exchange, he wouldn't hurt anyone else. Now some stranger had shattered that deal, and Ray didn't know how to put the pieces back together. His phone buzzed. A text from Karen. "Sophie's really hoping you'll come Friday. She hasn't stopped talking about it." He threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor, the screen cracking but not breaking. Stitch found out about the confrontation from Warren, who called her Thursday evening with worry in his voice. "He didn't take it well," Warren said. "Looked like I'd slapped him." "Where is he now?" "Don't know. Mabel says he didn't show up for his shift. She drove by his apartment. Truck's there, but he won't answer the door." Stitch closed her eyes. She'd seen this before, too. The spiral, the isolation, the way some men retreated into themselves when the walls started closing in, cutting off every lifeline until there was nothing left to grab. Danny had done the same thing. 2 weeks of silence before the end. She'd told herself he needed space, that he'd reach out when he was ready. By the time she realized her mistake, he was gone. She wasn't going to make that mistake again. "I'm coming to Cedar Falls," she said. "Tonight. Have Mabel meet me at the diner at 9. She made 3 more calls before she left. One to the chapter president, moving the writer's arrival up from Saturday to Friday morning. One to her VA contact, confirming that Ray's benefits file had indeed fallen through the cracks. He'd been eligible for disability payments for 3 years, but had never completed the paperwork. And one to a number she'd gotten from Mabel, a number that belonged to a woman named Karen Dawson in Springfield. Karen answered on the 4th ring, her voice guarded. "Who is this?" "My name is Carla Reyes. I served as a combat medic, same as your ex-husband served infantry. I'm calling because Ray is in trouble, and I think you might be the only person who can help." The line was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What kind of trouble?" Stitch told her. All of it. The eviction, the anonymous payment, Ray's reaction, the silence since Thursday afternoon. She told her about the medals, about the way Ray had looked at them in the diner, about the look in his eyes that she recognized from her brother's face. "He's disappearing," Stitch said. "I've seen it before. He's convincing himself that everyone would be better off without him, that his daughter would be better off without him." Karen's breath caught. "Sophie has a game tomorrow. She's been so excited. She thinks he's actually going to come. He might, if someone reminds him why he should. I can't. Karen's voice broke. I spent 2 years trying to pull him back. 2 years watching him drink and shut down and push everyone away. I had to protect Sophie. I had to. I know. Stitch's voice was gentle. You did what you had to do, but this isn't about those 2 years. This is about tomorrow. 1 game, 1 hour. If you tell him Sophie needs him there, really needs him, not as a project for school, but as her father, he might hear it. And if he doesn't? Stitch looked at the dog tags in her hand. Danny's name, Danny's service number, Danny's blood type, all that was left of a man who'd convinced himself that silence was the same as strength. Then we try something else, but we don't stop trying. That's the difference between the ones who make it and the ones who don't. Someone has to keep trying, even when they push back. Karen was quiet for a long time. Then, I'll call him. I can't promise it'll work, but I'll call. Ray was lying on his bed in the dark when the phone rang. He'd retrieved it from where he'd thrown it, stared at the cracked screen, almost thrown it again. But something had stopped him. The photograph in his wallet, maybe, the weight of the medals on the table, the silence that had started to feel less like peace and more like a grave. Karen's name on the caller ID. He almost let it ring out. Almost. Karen. Ray. Her voice was different than it had been on Monday. Softer. Scared. I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen. Can you do that? He didn't answer, but he didn't hang up either. Sophie's game is tomorrow. She made the varsity team as a freshman, Ray. She's the youngest player on the squad. Her coach says she has real talent, that she could play in college if she keeps working. Karen paused. She's been wearing your dog tags to practice, the ones you gave her before your second deployment. She says they're her good luck charm. Ray's hand moved to his chest, to the phantom weight of the tags he hadn't worn in years. She doesn't need a hero tomorrow, Karen continued. She doesn't need a medal or a speech or a father who has all his pieces put together. She just needs you in the stands. That's it. Sitting there, watching her play, being her dad. Her voice cracked. She's 14 years old, Ray. She still believes you're going to show up. Please don't let her stop believing. The line went dead. Ray lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling something shift in his chest that he couldn't name. He reached for the velvet pouch, opened it for the first time in months. The silver star caught the dim light from the window, its surface tarnished but unbroken. He thought about the ambush, the way he'd moved without thinking, dragging Morrison and Chen to cover while his own blood painted the sand. He hadn't felt brave that day. He'd felt terrified, but he'd moved anyway, because the alternative was watching 2 men die. Maybe showing up for Sophie was the same thing, not brave, just necessary. He put the medals back in the pouch, put the pouch in his jacket pocket, and reached for his phone. Mabel answered on the first ring. Ray? Thank God. Are you... I need tomorrow off, he said. My daughter has a game. At the diner, Stitch set down her coffee and smiled for the first time in 3 days. The sun rose over Cedar Falls on Friday morning, and with it came the sound of engines, 6 motorcycles riding in formation, chrome catching the early light. They parked in the lot behind Mabel's diner, killed their engines, and waited. Stitch met them with coffee and a plan. The game's at 3, she said. Springfield High School, 40 minutes east. We ride escort, but we stay back. He doesn't know we're coming, and he doesn't need to. This isn't about us. It's about him showing up for his kid. The chapter president, a barrel-chested man named Holt, nodded slowly. And if he doesn't make it? Stitch pulled out Danny's dog tags, let them catch the light. Then we go to Plan B, but I don't think we'll need it. She tucked the tags away. I talked to his ex-wife last night. She talked to him. Something shifted. You sure? Stitch looked east, toward Springfield, toward a gym where a 14-year-old girl was probably already warming up, wearing her father's dog tags like armor. No, she admitted, but I'm hopeful, and sometimes that's enough. The riders mounted up, the engines caught. And somewhere in Cedar Falls, Ray Dawson was putting on a clean shirt for the first time in weeks, trying to remember what it felt like to be someone's father. The drive to Springfield took 47 minutes. Ray knew, because he counted every one of them, his hands tight on the steering wheel, the velvet pouch pressing against his chest like a second heartbeat. Twice he almost turned around. Twice he thought about the gymnasium full of strangers, the questions they might ask, the looks they might give, but he kept driving, because Karen's voice was still in his head, and Sophie's face was still in his wallet, and somewhere beneath the fear was something that felt almost like hope. He didn't notice the motorcycles following him at a distance, didn't see them peel off one by one as he crossed into Springfield, taking up positions at intersections like an honor guard he'd never requested. Stitch had planned it that way. This wasn't about the club. This was about a father and a daughter and the 40 feet of bleachers between them. The parking lot at Springfield High was nearly full. Ray found a spot near the back, killed the engine, and sat there for 5 minutes, watching families stream toward the gymnasium doors. Mothers with foam fingers, fathers with video cameras, kids in matching jerseys, laughing and shoving each other the way kids did when they hadn't yet learned that the world could break you. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. The clean shirt helped. He'd shaved that morning, trimmed his hair as best he could with kitchen scissors. The prosthetic was invisible under his jeans, but he'd know it was there. He always knew. He got out of the truck, walked toward the doors. Each step felt like the ones he'd taken in the desert, moving toward danger because standing still wasn't an option. The gymnasium was loud, buzzers and whistles and the squeak of shoes on hardwood. Ray stood in the doorway, scanning the bleachers, looking for Karen. He found her on the home side, 3rd row up, a seat empty beside her like she'd been saving it. Their eyes met across the gym. Karen's hand went to her mouth. She didn't wave, didn't call out, just watched him. Walked toward her, her eyes filling with something that might have been tears. He climbed the bleachers, sat down in the empty seat. Neither of them spoke. On the court below, the teams were warming up. Ray scanned the players until he found her. Number 7, her ponytail bouncing as she practiced her serve. She was taller than he remembered, stronger. Not the 11-year-old who'd sat on his shoulders anymore, but not yet a stranger either. Around her neck, glinting in the gymnasium lights, hung his dog tags. She hasn't taken them off since August, Karen said quietly. Her coach tried to make her, said they were a safety hazard. She told him she'd quit the team before she took them off. Ray couldn't speak. His throat had closed around something sharp and hot. She doesn't know you're here, Karen continued. I didn't want to tell her in case... She stopped. In case you changed your mind. I almost did. The words came out rough. Twice on the drive. I don't know if I can do this, Karen. I don't know if I know how to be her father anymore. Karen was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and took his hand, the first time she'd touched him in 2 years. You're here, she said. That's the only thing that matters right now. The whistle blew. The game began. Ray watched his daughter play volleyball the way he'd once watched convoy routes, with total focus, tracking every movement, anticipating every threat. But there were no threats here, just a 14-year-old girl diving for balls and high-fiving teammates and playing her heart out on a Friday afternoon in September. Sophie was good, better than good. She had instincts Ray recognized, the same ones that had kept him alive in Afghanistan, the ability to read a situation before it developed, to be where she needed to be before anyone knew she was needed. Her coach called her name constantly, not in frustration, but in praise. At the end of the first set, she looked up at the bleachers, scanning for Karen probably. Her eyes moved across the crowd, passed over Ray, moved on, then snapped back. Ray watched his daughter's face go through something he couldn't name. Confusion first, then recognition, then something that broke him open in ways the IED never had. She didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood there on the court, staring at him, her teammates flowing around her like water around a stone. The coach called her name. She didn't move. Ray raised one hand, a small wave, the kind he used to give her from the doorway of her bedroom, back when he'd come home from work and she'd already be asleep, and he'd just stand there watching her breathe. Sophie's hand went to the dog tags around her neck. She pressed them against her chest, just for a moment. Then she turned back to the game, took her position, and played the second set, like her life depended on it. Springfield won. Sophie had 7 kills and 4 blocks, stats that meant nothing to Ray, but clearly meant something to the crowd, which erupted when the final whistle blew. He watched his daughter disappear into a huddle of teammates, then emerge a few minutes later, scanning the bleachers again. He was already on his way down. They met at the edge of the court, father and daughter, 3 years of silence between them. Sophie was sweating, her face flushed with victory, the dog tags hanging outside her jersey now, where everyone could see them. "You came," she said. Her voice was steadier than Ray had expected. Older. "I came. Mom said you might not. She said—" Sophie stopped, looked at her shoes. "I thought you forgot about me." The words hit Ray like mortar fire. He reached out, hesitated, then put his hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. "I never forgot about you," he said. "Not for 1 second. I forgot how to be the person you needed me to be. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Sophie." She looked up at him, her mother's eyes, but something of his own stubbornness in the set of her jaw. "You're here now," she said. "I'm here now." Sophie glanced at the door where her teammates were heading toward the locker room. Then she looked back at Ray and did something he hadn't expected, something that shattered the last of the walls he'd built around himself. She hugged him. Not a polite hug, not a careful hug, a real one, the kind she used to give him when he came home from deployment, back when she'd believed that hugs could fix anything. Ray wrapped his arms around his daughter and held on, feeling her shoulders shake, feeling the dog tags press between them like a promise. "I have to go change," Sophie said finally, pulling back. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. "Will you wait?" "I'll wait." She started toward the locker room, then turned back. "Dad?" The word hit him like a benediction. "Yeah? I'm really glad you came." She disappeared through the doors. Ray stood there on the edge of the court, surrounded by strangers, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like someone's father. Karen found him a few minutes later, standing in the same spot, watching the door where Sophie had gone. "She'll want to get dinner," Karen said. "There's a place she likes, a burger joint on 5th Street. She'll want you to come." Ray nodded slowly. Okay. Karen hesitated. "Ray, I don't know what happens next. I don't know if this is the start of something or just a moment. But whatever it is, thank you for showing up. Someone reminded me what I was fighting for." Ray thought about the biker at the diner, the one who'd picked up his medals without a word. He hadn't seen her since, but he'd felt her presence all week, in the rent that got paid, in the phone call from Karen, in all the small interventions that had pushed him toward this gym on this afternoon. "I think I have some people to thank." Outside, in the parking lot, Stitch sat on her bike with the engine off, watching through the gymnasium's high windows. She couldn't see details, just shapes moving in the light, but she'd seen Ray's truck in the lot, and she'd seen him walk through those doors, and that was enough. Holt pulled up beside her, killed his engine. He made it. What now? Stitch pulled Danny's dog tags from under her shirt and held them in her palm. The late afternoon sun caught the metal, turning it to gold. Now we make sure he keeps making it. She tucked the tags away. "I talked to the VA contact. Ray's got 3 years of disability benefits he never claimed. Paperwork fell through the cracks when he was drinking, and nobody followed up. We're going to fix that." "How much?" "Enough to change his life. Enough to get him out of that apartment, maybe take some classes, rebuild something real." She started her engine. "But that's next week's problem. Tonight he's having dinner with his daughter. That's the only thing that matters." The sun was setting over Springfield, painting the parking lot in shades of orange and gold. Inside the gymnasium, Ray Dawson waited for his daughter, the velvet pouch heavy in his pocket, his heart heavier still. But it was a different kind of weight now, not the weight of guilt or shame or silence, the weight of something he'd almost forgotten he could carry. Hope. 4 months later, on a Tuesday morning in January, Ray Dawson walked into the Crossroads Diner through the front door instead of the back. He'd driven 40 minutes from Springfield to get there, past the turnoff for his old apartment, rented now to a young couple with a baby, past the hardware store where Warren Kessler still waved from the window every time he saw a familiar face. Mabel spotted him before he'd taken 3 steps. She came around the counter and hugged him hard, the way she'd wanted to that first day but had known better than to try. "Look at you," she said, holding him at arm's length. "You're filling out. You're sleeping." 8 hours a night, most nights. Ray smiled. It still felt strange on his face, but less strange than it used to. "Sophie makes me text her when I go to bed. Says she's keeping me accountable." "Smart girl. Gets it from her mother." He slid onto his usual stool, though nothing was usual anymore, and Mabel poured him coffee without asking. The diner was quiet, the breakfast rush still an hour away. Through the front windows, the January sun was just clearing the hills, painting the frost on Route 7 in shades of pink and gold. The VA benefits had come through in October, 3 years of back payments, enough to clear his debts and put a deposit on a small house in Springfield, 15 minutes from Sophie's school. He'd started classes at the community college in November, not for a degree, not yet, but just to prove to himself that he could still learn. Psychology 101, taught by a professor who'd served in Iraq and didn't flinch when Ray's hands shook during the lecture on trauma. He was also volunteering 2 days a week at a veterans outreach center. Downtown, answering phones mostly, making coffee, sitting with men who reminded him of himself 6 months ago, silent, isolated, convinced they didn't deserve help. He didn't give speeches or offer advice, he just sat with them, the way Stitch had sat at this counter, watching and waiting until they were ready to be seen. The bell over the door chimed. Ray turned on his stool and saw her walk in, leather-cut, gray-streaked hair, the road saint's patch faded from years of weather. Stitch. She stopped when she saw him. Then she smiled, and something in her eyes eased, like a knot finally coming loose. "Heard you might be here," she said, sliding onto the stool beside him. "Mabel called." "Thought I owed you breakfast." Ray pushed a menu toward her. "Or lunch, or whatever meal covers 3 months of back rent and a phone call that saved my life." Stitch shook her head. "You don't owe me anything." "Then let me buy you coffee anyway." They sat in silence while Mabel poured a second cup. The diner was starting to fill now, the early risers trickling in, the smell of bacon cutting through the coffee and cold air. Ray watched Stitch wrap her hands around the mug, saw the edge of a tattoo on her wrist, a name inked in simple script. Danny. "Your brother," he said. It wasn't a question. Stitch nodded. 8 years next month. Still feels like yesterday. She took a sip of coffee. "He was a medic, like me. Came home from his second tour and couldn't find his way back. I tried to help, but I didn't know how. Didn't know the signs." She looked at Ray. "I know them now." "The dog tags you wear, his?" "Yeah." She pulled them out, let them rest against her chest where Ray could see them. "I carry them, so I remember what happens when someone falls through the cracks, so I keep looking for the ones who are falling." Ray reached into his jacket and pulled out the velvet pouch. He'd stopped carrying the medals in his pocket. They lived in a box on his dresser now, next to the photograph of Sophie and a letter she'd written him for Christmas. But he'd brought them today. He'd known somehow that he'd need them. He opened the pouch and set the silver star on the counter between them. "I used to think this was a lie," he said. "A piece of metal they gave me for doing something anyone would have done, for surviving when other people didn't." He touched the star's tarnished surface. "I still don't know if I earned it, but I'm starting to think that's not the point." Stitch waited. "The point is what you do after. Whether you let it bury you, or whether you use it to dig someone else out." Ray looked at her. "You dug me out. You and Mabel and Karen and everyone else who kept showing up when I was trying to disappear. I don't know how to repay that." "You pay it forward." Stitch picked up the medal, turned it over in her hands, then set it back down. "That's how it works. Someone pulls you out, you pull out the next one. Chain goes on forever if you let it." Ray put the medal back in the pouch. He'd give it to Sophie someday, maybe, or donate it to the outreach center, let it sit in a case where other veterans could see it and know they weren't alone. He hadn't decided yet, but for the first time in years, the future felt like something to move toward instead of something to survive. The breakfast rush was picking up. Mabel passed by with a pot of coffee, topping off their cups without breaking stride. Outside, a pickup truck pulled into the lot, and Ray watched a young man get out, thin, tired, moving, with the careful gait of someone carrying more weight than his body could hold. The man hesitated at the door. Ray recognized that hesitation. He'd lived it. He caught Stitch's eye. She nodded once, understanding. Ray stood up from his stool, left a 20 on the counter, and walked toward the door. The young man looked up as he approached, wariness flickering across his face. "Coffee's good here," Ray said. "Best in the county. You look like you could use a cup." The man stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Ray held the door open and let him walk through first. Behind them, Stitch watched from the counter. Danny's dog tags warm against her chest. She lifted her coffee cup in a silent toast to the brother she couldn't save and to all the ones she still could. The morning light filled the diner. The coffee pot hissed, and somewhere between the counter and the door, another chain link formed, quiet, unnoticed, unbreakable. If this story moved you, subscribe so you never miss one, and tell us, who held the door open for you when you needed it most?